Okay, next question. Not something that we necessarily went through in a lot of depth. This was in the book, though, and it's on the presentations. 1920, Warren G. Harding took over. He's the guy that was responsible for the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the Dawes Plan, and the Teapot Dome scandal. His call, or his kind of plea, was a return to normalcy. Was his call relevant? Why or why not? What were the results? Now, in this case, normalcy meant returning to the way things were before World War I. So World War I, 1914 to 1918, our whole country was focused on war and nothing else. So he wanted us to return to the way things were, and that meant returning to isolationism, or being by ourselves, not getting involved with other countries, not making alliances, not getting drug into any wars, and just focusing on what's going on in America. Was it relevant? Yes, it was relevant because we just got done with war. However, the bad things about this were we started treating people not as equals, and we kind of closed our doors to people who weren't like us. So we talked about nativism, favoring only native-born people. We didn't want immigrants, so we had racism. We talked about how the KKK membership was at an all-time high. We had discrimination. And then we also had immigration quotas that affected our nation negatively. So we kind of took a step back when it came to, how we treated people. What are quotas again? Anybody remember? Immigration quotas? So we only let a set number of people in from certain countries. On Crash Course, John Green said we let 50 people per year in from the Philippines. 50. That's it. We let 0 people per year in from the Asian countries of China and Japan. That's a quota, and that negatively affects our country. Next one. Describe the changing role of women in the 20s. How do these changes affect women today? A lot of them here, but they all started with the voting. Women's suffrage was passed. Women were allowed to vote, and that kick-started, their effort to become equal in our country that, you could argue still goes on today. So when they were allowed to vote, they gained all sorts of freedoms. They also got into the workplace a little bit. We talked about the new technologies that made life easier. It also gave people more time, including women who were used to taking care of the house. Now they had a little bit of freedom. They could go out and work. They could also go out and get an education. It liberated them, which meant it gave them freedom. Social roles of women. Now, almost everything you look at with the 20s talks about flappers. What were flappers, Adam?
Women that dressed different than what they were before.
Sure, just women who acted differently in public. They wore shorter skirts, different haircuts. They smoked. Now, this was part of the 20s, but keep in mind, that's a big stereotype that every girl in the 20s was like this. That wasn't necessarily true. It was a small portion, but still, it had a big impact on the future. Now, did that lead to anything today? It definitely kick-started the movement. Are men and women equal today? I think as much as they've ever been, but there's always going to be stereotypes, and there's always going to be, inequalities here and there. Questions on that one? Okay. Next one is about the same topic we just covered. So explain isolationism. Why did America think we needed to return to this, and what did we do to try to get us back to it? So if I say, Luke is back there, he's isolated, what do I mean? He's by himself. He's separate. Okay? So isolation means no foreign commitments. We're not going to say, all right, Britain, we got your back. So whatever happens to you, we'll be right there. We'll give you money. We'll give you troops. We'll go to war. We don't want that because we already experienced it with World War I, and we lost a lot of money, a lot of troops. It wasn't good. We don't want war. We don't want to spend our money, like I just said. Fear of communism we talked about with Russia. So what did we do to make sure we're isolated? The things we just said. We set quotas. We didn't want anybody from other countries here. We had nativism. We had discrimination. We had racism. The other things we did were the government took more control, and they prosecuted people like Sacco and Vanzetti that might not have been guilty, but they took more control because they wanted to stay, free from foreign influence. And like I already said, we took a step back in terms of our quality as a free country and our reputation as a country that has open arms to everybody. So we took a step back like by a generation because of World War I, and that was because we wanted to return to isolation. Good? Okay, last question is just general about the Roaring Twenties. So there's a lot of things you could write for this, but it basically says what do we mean by the Roaring Twenties? Why is it called the Roaring Twenties? Why is this decade given that legacy? So we talked about all these negative things already. The positives are what we talked about this past Wednesday. New technologies. We had electricity spreading, and that made people's lives easier so they could do things like leisure time activities. They could go, to a sporting event. They could listen to the radio. We had cars now. We can move. And all of that led to a lot of good things for our economy. So our economy was booming. Production was at an all-time best. Now that is the Roaring Twenties. Women were also more free. We talked about that. More jobs because of all the new technology. People had to build those cars and toasters and vacuums. So that was good, which gave people money. Cities were huge during the 20s. They grew at a rate that we've never seen. In Chapter 13, we talked about this was the first time that more people lived in cities than in a rural area. Culture was different. This was the Jazz Age, new kinds of music, art. Harlem Renaissance happened during this time. Discretionary income was kind of a new thing for people. Back then, before the 20s, people saved every dollar because they had to spend every dollar to live. Now they have a little bit of money to play with, so they can use on what they want, like those appliances, like those cars. And then the last thing is, this was all good, and it was the Roaring Twenties, but some of it might have been superficial or fake because people thought this was going to go on forever, where in reality it never could. So it was kind of a fake prosperity. Even though there were some good times in the 20s, a lot of things set us up for failure, and failure is going to come in the form of the Great Depression. Questions on this one? Okay.